when we're talking about complicated things, then yes, having deep knowledge and experience with the programming language is very important. But doing simple things, I feel that anybody who is proficient in coding can jump into any language relatively fast, at least for simple tasks.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 142. Do we need coding for DevOps? Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. We keep on getting asked this question in some way, shape, or form. And this one comes from Zeal Type Code. Do I need to know or learn framework development for DevOps like APIs and connecting to databases? And I believe the short answer is, if you're working in any kind of role in technology today, you have to know how to code.
Absolutely. That's what distinguishes DevOps from Ops, right? In Ops is the old guard. I do not write code, but I operate the system type of approach, right? And even operators, at least the good ones, as a minimum, operators are writing shell scripts, which is coding, right? Unless we start saying that coding is only if you write something in Java or Go, right? So even Ops code and DevOps, I mean, there is the word dev over there, right? Development. You're developing something. Otherwise, you're an Ops and not the good one.
Yeah, if you're using the word DevOps, and again, do we believe in DevOps? That's the whole reason why this podcast is named the way it is. But if you do believe it's a real thing, it's in the name. And I do believe writing shell scripts is a valid way of programming.
Oh yeah, I remember a long time ago, was it DICE, I think, or something like that, that they wrote the whole scheduler kind of. Kubernetes-like scheduler. Of course, not as big as Kubernetes, not even close, but completely in shell script. You can do anything you want in a shell script. It's not recommended to go crazy with shell scripts. They have thousands and thousands of lines in a script, but it is definitely coding. And what you said before is absolutely true. I don't think that we should actually even pose the question as, hey, should DevOps write code? I think that the right question is, should people in software industry write code? No matter whether you're working on a front-end application or a back-end application, whether you're working with testing or operations or anything in between, you are writing code. Otherwise, you do not belong in this industry. This is what I'm saying is harsh. I know that. And I know that this is going to be negatively received by some. But if maybe, I mean, I can forgive maybe managers for not writing code. And only because they were writing some code sometime in the past. But now kind of you're not writing code because you're a manager or maybe you're CEO or something like that. Okay, kind of accept it. I'm not saying that that's great, but it's acceptable. Anything else, you're writing code or you're in the wrong industry. It's as easy as that.
If you're a frontline person, also known as a bottom of the org chart type person, and you're not writing code, and you're working in the tech side of things, again, we said even a shell script, a batch file, if you're on Windows, PowerShell script, all are valid. But why is it that we're saying you need to do this? If all you know is how to point and click, then you're going to be relegated to the bottom of the org chart the rest of your life, whether you want to be or not. That's the problem. You may choose to be at the bottom of the org chart, and that's okay too. I'm one of those people. But when you don't have a choice, or when the choices you've made keep you at the bottom, that's up to you.
it doesn't really matter even if you're at the bottom or top or middle or wherever you are. Simply, today you cannot do the job if you're not writing any code and not even shell scripts. You simply cannot do it. I mean, you can do it, but then you start wondering, hey, why are we doing so badly, right? In our business, in our company, and what's not, right? Like, let's say that you're managing infrastructure. Let's say that you're using AWS. Of course, I know that you can get to a certain level, certain point by clicking on AWS console. You can do that. But sooner or later, you will not be able to keep up. Or a company will need to have 5 of you to do the job for one person. Once you scale beyond something very simple. The same thing goes for testing, right? I've seen many times in the past how, hey, we cannot do full regression testing of our yearly release. I'm not even talking about daily releases or weekly. No, kind of. We do releases twice a year and we do not have time to do regression testing. And of course you don't have time because you have thousands of tests that you need to execute manually because you never wrote a single line of code. And I can say the same thing for every other aspect of the industry or role in the industry. You are inefficient if you're not writing any code, like anything that is interpretable by machines. Even low code. I'm now exploring one of the low code tools, which I'm not going to reveal, but you'll see it later. And that tool allows you to do drag and drop, and you kind of say, hey, I want a cluster, I want a pipeline, I want this, I want that. And you say, hey, there is no code involved. But that is not true. Because the moment you need to connect and say, hey, I just created this Kubernetes cluster and I want to drag and drop something to deploy that application to the cluster, you need to write 5 words as JavaScript code in that tool. Because you still need to tell that something, hey, that's my cluster. That's from where you get the connection string, right? So even in low-code tools, you need to write some code.
And let's say, just for the sake of argument, when we're saying code right now, we are specifically talking about imperative coding. Just for the sake of argument for the moment, right? You need to know a language. We're going to step away from, if you're more of the ops side, yes, you probably need to know Terraform. If you're choosing Pulumi, you've got to know a real language anyway. So how do we, if people were to start today, it's 2022. If people are starting today, what language, because this is usually the next question, okay, well, what language do I need to learn? I think you just hit on one. As much as it pains me, JavaScript is one of those languages, or TypeScript is one of those languages.
I think that the first language should be shell scripting.
I agree.
That's kind of the bare minimum. Hey, whatever you're doing on your laptop, you never even see real servers. You are going to write a few lines of shell.
Okay, that's a given. That's language 0, right? So getting beyond shell, bash, or PowerShell, whatever it is, right? Ignore those for a moment. PowerShell, I guess, is a little more complex. Is it JavaScript? Is it Python?
Working on really. If you're on ops side, then I probably wouldn't go with JavaScript. I would go with Python. It's the first choice. For its simplicity, it's very easy, very simple. You don't need even to compile it. You just run it. So Python for ops, and then maybe Go if you want to go a bit further. JavaScript, I think it's more for application developers.
Well, you were just mentioning, though, even with the low code, you had to know at least a little bit of either JavaScript or TypeScript, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So that the tool in question uses JavaScript behind the scenes for that low code. And then some other tool will use something else, right? Or will use JavaScript as well. I was more referring, hey, if you're going to create more powerful script, so not script like shell script, but something to do something from operational perspective, I'm not sure that I would like to start Node.js or go with JavaScript for that. So I'm talking about scripts on steroids, right? Probably Python. Now, the tooling that once you adopt some tools, then they will have different supports for different languages, and sometimes they're JavaScript, sometimes that is Python, and other times it's something else. Groovy, for example, right? And I feel that when we're talking about programming within the tools, which is usually simpler type of programming than when you develop your own application, right? I would say that it doesn't really matter what language that tool supports as long as you know how to write code. When we're talking about complicated things, then yes, having deep knowledge and experience with the programming language is very important. But doing simple things, I feel that anybody who is proficient in coding can jump into any language relatively fast, at least for simple tasks. I haven't written Python in a long time, and I'm pretty sure that if you give me now the task that I need to do something simple, I can write Python code again, even if I haven't touched it in many years, or JavaScript, or any language. A language that I never saw in my life, you can do simple things if you know how to write code.
Well, and I think that goes back to the initial question is, do I need to learn a development framework? Do you need to do it when you're starting out? I don't believe so. I think the way you're explaining it is you need to know a language and understand the basics of the language. Now, you didn't call out Java, and that's probably fine, right?
No, Java, why not? Java.
Well, Java would be okay, but again, you probably would not use Java if all I needed really was basically a Groovy file to run, right? If I understand Groovy, I can use that for parsing. I can do all sorts of things just with Groovy.
For operations, for example, I would choose Groovy over Java. Groovy flavor.
Yeah, because that's going to be, I would still need the JVM. That's okay. But then from that point, do you need to know what's the Groovy framework? Grails. Do I need to know Grails in order to use Groovy? No, you don't. You just need, think about it. This is where going back to language zero. What is your shell script? When shell scripts become too painful, and they can become painful pretty quickly, unless you've been writing them and you have a long gray ponytail, male or female, right? Back then, that's what you had. So sometimes if you got to come up with control structures, whatever it is, that's where a language is probably going to serve you better. What I'll call a first order language. It's probably not the right phrase, but that's where a Groovy or Python will work out better for you longer term than a shell script, probably. Now there's downsides to that, because that means now you've got to keep, in the case of Groovy or even Python, you've got a runtime underneath that you have to keep there, versus a shell script is going to run on pretty much any machine that you put it on. But did you pick which version of shell? Corn, Bash, Z? So even then you've got to be careful of, okay, which do I really use?
Any POSIX will work almost anywhere.
But that's the key part, is almost anywhere.
Yeah.
It's a higher chance versus, okay, hey, go run this script. Well, you gave them a Groovy file and they don't have the JVM installed.
If you look at it from the perspective of where it can run, then shell wins without a doubt. Probably Python. If I for a moment ignore the thing with different versions in Python, which I failed to understand how all the nonsense around Python 2 and 3, if I ignore that, Python is probably installed everywhere as well. It simply exists everywhere. If you have Windows with WSLD or Mac, Python is already there. Servers already have it as well. So it's there. You can almost consider it as widely available as shell, whichever shell you choose, right?
Python-V, that will give you the answer, if it's there or not, no matter which flavor of it is. But again, going back to this question, do I need to know a development framework and knowing how to connect to DBs as a DevOps? No, not day one. Probably not even day 5. But over time, maybe, right?
If you even start contemplating a framework, that means that you are most likely working on something that is long-term to begin with. It would not even occur to me to even think about any framework for anything that I'm going to cook within a day or even a week. It's just a waste of time. So, and we are probably talking about building an application rather than a helper script or something like that when we're talking about frameworks. They can take time to get used to, but I still see frameworks more or less as libraries. Once I know the language that I'm working in and I'm proficient with it, and then I know what I'm doing and stuff like that, then hey, what do you need to do? You need to do that. You Google it, you find out the library or a framework, whatever. You spend an hour or two with it, and off you go. It's not really a big deal as long as you understand what you're doing on the programming level. I mean, there are probably frameworks that take more than an hour. I give you that, but still. JavaScript might be different. I think that JavaScript frameworks are actually bigger than languages themselves, right? Especially for frontend. But if I exclude those, frameworks are just libraries that you invoke and they do something.
Well, a framework is a helper. So you don't have to bring everything up. There's nothing special about a framework other than it's saving you time, hopefully. Now, if you're on a team that has been tasked with creating a platform, then more than likely you are going to be working with frameworks and databases and everything else. That's a completely different thing versus a role that's more operational focused. Operationally focused, if you can make it by with a shell script, stay there. If the shell script starts falling apart, then move towards a language. Python is probably going to be it out of the box for pretty much every OS. Not saying that you would, or if you enjoy Go and you want to go write a binary, this is the plus side of Go. I think even over Python is I can write it once, cross-compile it, whether it's Windows or Linux or Mac, I've got a binary and I'm ready to go. That's the upside of understanding Go at least from a CLI perspective.
There is one more, and that's interaction with APIs. Not that Go is better than other languages at that part, but as it stands right now, when we're talking about operations, about something system level, most tend to now publish Go libraries first and other languages second. So if you want to interact with Kubernetes, Go libraries are without doubt the best ones to use. If you want to interact with your favorite cloud vendor, there is a strong chance that Go is there. So the library support for system level or maybe infrastructure level interactions tend to be better or to exist compared to others that don't exist for Go.
Why do you think that that's happened?
The answer is very simple. For system level applications or tools or whatever, Go ended up being the preferable language. So simply the things are written in Go, and then it's only natural to expose those things through libraries that are also available in Go. It wouldn't make sense for, let's say, Kubernetes community to provide any other types of helper libraries than Go first, simply because Kubernetes is written in Go. You need to do something with, Prometheus, with Service Mesh, with this and that. Go. They're all written in Go. And not all, but vast majority. Now, cloud providers, they were traditionally not Go. So Go might not be the first one. But now we got to the point that Go is in the first batch released, right? If you look at like serverless, right? Before, it was, hey, serverless works first with JavaScript and then JavaScript and Java, maybe Python, things like that. And now we see that is changing, that Go is always in the first batch.
But again, that's leaning more towards the application development side and not necessarily the operation side. But it is a language that can be easily cross-compiled with no frameworks, right? There are frameworks, but it's a lighter weight language. I still question some of the things about it, but, generics, why Go? Why are you doing that? But do you need coding to do DevOps? The answer is yes. What level of coding do you need? Depends on what you're doing at the moment. I'll reiterate this again. Start with whatever your native shell language is for the OS you're using, right? That's the place to start. Except maybe, let me go this way. Except in the case of if you're using multiple shells, then you might want to go ahead and move towards the Python as your next step. I would have to guess.
I would just make a small exception. Please don't go with PowerShell.
Why do you
use
say
bash.
that?
For the reasons that you mentioned earlier. PowerShell works only in Windows. And Windows is getting smaller and smaller every day. Maybe not on consumer electronics, not maybe on your laptops, but servers, it's going away. And Bash, for example, works everywhere, including Windows, while PowerShell works only in Windows.
That's not true. You can run PowerShell on you name it.
Really? Oh,
Yes.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yes.
Does anybody do that?
I don't know. I don't know if they do or not. The reason why I liked PowerShell, and still do, more or less, and I don't use it a lot, but anytime I had to interact with ESX from VMware, that was just naturally all PowerShell. And it was just the easiest way to, and that was, now I will say that's been a few years ago. But yeah, you can use PowerShell on Linux. PowerShell, I mean, there are some nice things about PowerShell because the control structures versus Bash, or just what I'll call Linux shell, is a lot easier to do.
My limited understanding of PowerShell tells me that PowerShell is a better choice than, let's say, Bash. But it's not a portable choice. I mean, you said that PowerShell works everywhere, but I'm pretty sure that it doesn't work everywhere out of the box. If I now spin up an EC2 instance, Linux EC2 instance based on whatever, Ubuntu, PowerShell is not there.
It's not there. You have to install it. That is correct.
Exactly.
Yes.
And Shell has that, Bash, let's say, has that advantage, or SH to go even lower, right? Has that advantage that it literally works everywhere.
Yes.
Including Windows laptops, assuming that everybody has WSLD today.
Correct. WSL was the game changer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So without WSL, I would say, hey, PowerShell is a good option. I mean, there is a lot of Windows machines. But now all those Windows machines are running Linux. And if you go and see instructions for anything, like pick your favorite random tool, there is Shell. I'm not even talking about scripting, just pure commands.
Yeah. I think let's go with this one. If your shop is a Windows shop migrating to Linux, and you already have a lot of PowerShell written, and you already have a lot of brain trust written in PowerShell, then PowerShell is going to be the correct answer short term, maybe even midterm. It'll be not enough data to know if it'd be the right long-term solution or not. We recently had a live stream that we did over on the DevOps Toolkit channel back at the end of 2021, where I was hammering the word context. It's all about context. And that next step that you need to make may seem dumb, but it's the next step. Going from, if you're already all PowerShell and now you want to say, okay, now I want to go all Python, and you've never written any Python in your life, and you're going to Linux. If I've got this intermediate as I can run PowerShell on Linux, that's the next right step versus starting all over with Python just because. Anyway, the real question is, as a DevOps person, do I need to know development frameworks and being able to connect to databases? In general, no. But do you need to know how to program?
I would rephrase actually your general no. I would say once you have a need for that, that's not going to be a problem. You don't need to know it in advance. Let's put it that way. If you know how to write code, then figuring out how to connect to a database, once you need to connect it, it's going to come at no cost.
It will be trivial at that point.
Exactly.
So what do you do in your shop? Are you still pointing and clicking? Did you make it to the shell script level? Or have you made it all the way to just writing your own CLIs? Head over to the Slack workspace. Look it over in the podcast channel. You'll see a post for this one. Do we need coding for DevOps? And leave your comments there. We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.